In the previous section, I told you how understanding touch helps you figure out where to put controls and information on the page. Now we're going to talk a little more about designing things like the text and icons themselves. First, I don't want to hear a word about this sort of stuff. People don't hold their phone with one hand, only tap with their thumb, or stretch to reach other areas. People hold their phones in many different ways. Sure, 75% of users only touch the screen with one thumb, but that can be misleading. Because less than half hold the phone with one hand also, and that's for phones, much less for phablets and tablets, of course. 36% cradle the device, using a second hand for reach or stability. And fully 10% hold it in one hand and tap with a finger, giving a totally different sort of interaction. And it's contextual. Hardly anyone holds their phone with two hands, except when they type, at which point they shift their grip, and over 40% of people observed use their phone like this. People shift their grip and change to suit their needs and their external contexts. Be very careful quoting me, or quoting Luke Bluesky quoting me, as it depends a lot on what's happening. People can and will touch any part of the screen. Yes, even on large phones and phablets. Don't pay attention to any of the lamentations that the iPhone 6, and especially the 6 Plus, are too big. It doesn't really matter, and we know how to design for large screens. Why? Well, partly because fully a third of smartphones sold in 2014 are phablets, big phones like that. We know that people are more accurate in the middle of the screen, and they prefer to touch and view there as well. As we talked about in the last video, adjust the size of your targets to account for position of the screen, instead of just avoiding them. Larger at the edges than the center. Check for proper spacing by measuring between centers. Center the size target in the tappable area, and if anything else is in the circle, that has a chance of being tapped by accident. As we discussed before, these top icons are a bit too close together, and the tabs far too short, so you can tap the action buttons or a tweet by accident. Touch targets need to be visible, all the time, even when you're tapping on them. When you click a whole row, and especially one multiple lines long like this, that works great. But little icons like the retweet here are too small, so the user can't accurately target them, can't confirm which one's selected, and can't see that the selected state changed on tap. You can't be sure you tapped it at all. Provide large enough targets to make sure that people can see the target, see the label, and see the click state, even when their finger is on top of the target. Measuring is great, but try to always just provide the largest practical touch targets. Don't just code the word or icon as a link, but like these guys do, make the natural boundaries in your design, boxes, buttons, or whole rows, the selectable or linked area. Tap anywhere near the word or icon, and you hit the target. Look around and you'll see that this is a known best practice. The Google Drawer menu isn't as small as it appears, with just a little arrow or a menu icon. A default implementation also opens it on selecting the branding or label, so it's much easier to tap than it appears. Lots of hybrid apps haven't noticed this and code it wrong. Sadly, Google seems to have forgotten they did it, and in Android 5 it no longer works. The much smaller target area now is a noticeable issue. Make sure selectable items are clearly selectable. If it doesn't look clickable, people don't know it is. Underlines aren't bad for text, inline, but especially for apps, you mostly need to bound items. That doesn't mean everything has to be a bold box or default button. Here, translucent backgrounds in the menu and controls, and a sort of circular tab strip around that center object suffice to define them as functions. I'm starting to see that any bound item is considered selectable. If some visual designer had boxed the title element for visual consistency, people would assume they can tap it to get more details. The way it's drawn here is better. It's differentiated by a distinct style, and combined with a few typical icons like play, it clearly all says, these are clickable. Clickable items need to not just afford their action, making clear what it does, but do so consistently. Somebody tell me why here my calendar name, attendance, and the participants are selectable rows, but the location is a link. It doesn't just look like a link, it is one. I have to click exactly where the little words are. Be consistent and make the whole contained areas, like we talked about, rows or boxes, selectable. That's what's expected. People tap where there are words and icons, but generally scroll where there are not. They'll scroll in the center, but only when the labels are short. Long labels, like on the right, make people try to avoid the text, so they scroll more to the side to get away from them. Make sure your design isn't so packed in there's no place for people to comfortably gesture. Yes, this does vary based on device size. On tablets, your content might be shorter, so there's more room. I've normalized all the data to the handset scale so you can compare it more directly here. You might think that users would stick to the edges on tablets because they're bigger. Of course people can't reach the center, but wrong. People are always inclined to tap the center of the screen, so when room is available to confidently scroll without covering content, they'll happily move their finger, thumb, or stylus over there, even if it's a reach or requires repositioning their finger or even moving their device. You're probably all familiar with YouTube, and they're pretty successful at driving people to other content. But let's look at their list view with all those scroll use rates. Text is likely to be obscured, which could be critical to finding the right content. Think about what you want people to click on and what you want people to read when making your list views. I've said it before, in general, as devices get larger, they're used less and less held in the hand. But we can get even more information from this. We know how they're used and can surmise distance from the eye by device class. This is critical, partly because we don't view anything based on size, but on the resolution at our eyeballs. And the relationship between this and that is called angular resolution, which we can calculate. This is actually the simple version of the formula. To get the 3,438 number requires knowing the size of the sensors in your eyeballs and so forth. You don't have to try to take a screenshot of this formula or break out calculators. I've done the math for you, though. As I said, the larger devices get, the further away from the eye they're used. Small handsets are held very close to the eye, larger ones in phablets further away, and tablets at approximately desktop distance, since so many are in stands with keyboards. You can just assume that. Minimum text sizes vary from 4 points for small handsets to 10 points for devices set on tables or in stands. Yes, of course it depends on the actual context, but we can make good guesses based on device classes. Never forget these are physical units of measure. Typographer's points is what I mean when I say points at any time. Adjust as much as you can to device measures, such as pixels, DP, SP, and iOS's points. And these are minimums. At least 30% larger for almost all actual use, like body copy. Larger for more readability, for active environments, for older populations. Of course, for hierarchical things like titles of pages. The smallest sizes are okay for things like labels under icons, though. Icons and other elements follow the same scale rules and can roughly follow about these actual sizes. They have basically the same concerns of readability, legibility, and understanding as text does. Most sites that pay any attention at all to being specifically designed for mobile and tablet make the text on the tablet somewhat larger, but not big enough. In an attempt to make the tablet based on desktop design, they try to fit everything in there. Sidebars are generally a good hint you're doing it wrong. Because when you account for difficult distance, handsets and tablets look more like this at the eyeball. The tablet type is not big enough, so your viewers lean, peer, or just have lower readability and don't notice what you said. Design for the way people actually use their devices. However they use them. That means designing for the way people really hold and touch their phones, not the way you use yours. That we design interactions and even controls based on patterns of use by device class. Tablets are not the same as handsets, and none of those are the same as a desktop or laptop computer. In part 11, I'll talk about making sure input is easy, error-free, and maybe even fun.